Welcome to Vendetta Sports Media. This is Eight-Sided Freaks. And today we've got a little bit of a packed episode. We've got some recaps. We've got some previews. We got some fight announcements. So we're hitting on all fronts here. We're recapping UFC Vegas 99. We'll do the main event, and we'll do some final thoughts on the rest of the card. Previewing UFC Vegas 99. Couple Apex events in a row. So we've got the main event of that one that we'll preview as well, and then saying we will hit some final thoughts on the rest of those fights. And then after that, we're going to close the show talking about fight announcements. So we've got four here that we're going to talk about. For the biggest ones, UFC announced the UFC 310 news, and there are some other fight announcements as well. So we've got a full slate here of preview, recap, and fight announcements. So a lot to talk about today. And we'll start off right at last week's card, recapping Brandon Royval and Tatsuro Taira. Anthony, we can send it over to you first. Brandon Royval went out there, picked up a split decision win, 3-2 on all three judges' scorecard, or not all three, on two of the three judges' scorecards. What did you make of the main event?
I thought it was a fun main event overall. I think it lived up to it. It was a good little scrap. Um, I think it's kind of shows you and top. Even though people sometimes don't watch flyweights and they're always seem like they always get the short end of the stick. That if you put two of like the top guys together, it could be a fun fight. So I like the striking. I thought a lot of the scrambles were fun. Um, some of the with Tyra, like his when he takes back and stuff, he does, he's able to control that for a while. It seems like as much as Royval was struggling and trying to scramble and get out of there, I mean, he was just keeping that position. A few different submission attempts throughout, but overall, I thought it was I did agree with that. I thought it was the right decision. Royval 3-2. So I think that was a huge win for Royval, obviously, and Tyra just looked good for as young as he is. And I thought it was pretty cool the way Royval handled it too on the mic, really hyping him up afterwards too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Jay. Go ahead.
I missed the fight. I was at a college football game, but from what you guys were saying and what I've seen, it was like looked like it was a very entertaining fight. And there's a reason we keep getting more and more flyweight main events for, especially for like these fight night cards. It's the top guys are entertaining. The top guys are all very close in skill and level, and just makes it more and more exciting. We'll talk on one of the flyweight fights later on this, but it's just there's more and more guys coming up and makes it for a good time. So glad to see another flyweight main event get recognition.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of flyweight main events. I think we talked about that in the preview for this as well, or we've definitely talked about it recently because there have been several in the recent months, and there's a couple more coming up as well. I know we've got Moreno and Albazi coming up, so we've talked positively about flyweight main events, and this one I think panned out. I was really impressed with both guys for certain extents. We had. I think we saw what both guys were capable of. Even though Taira lost that fight, he went out there, got the back, landed some takedowns, put Royval in some bad spots, and won 2 rounds pretty cleanly. At the same time, Royval went out there, showed his pace, showed his boxing ability, showed a lot of the things that he can do. He almost got to finish in the third round. So I thought both guys did a good job showing, the skills ahead. It wasn't a whitewash. It wasn't a domination, but a clean, solid, competitive fight. So I was impressed from both guys, and obviously Royval gets the victory, and I think that was a product of being. I don't know if Royval is necessarily a veteran, but I think Taira is certainly green. He's obviously 24, first big fight, first 5-round fight in the UFC. Royval has fought in multiple main events. He's fought in a title fight. Definitely the more experienced guy, and I think that was the deciding factor ultimately, on top of cardio as well for Royval. So, moving forward with these two guys, I think a lot of people were ready to shoo Tatsuro Taira into a title fight if he won, and then Royval going out there getting the victory kind of put a little bit of a kink in that because he does have the loss to Pantoja relatively recently. That was December of last year, so it hasn't even been a year since he challenged for the title, but he's already went out there and got wins over Moreno and Tatsuro Taira. So for Brandon Royval, do you guys think another shot at the title is deserved, or do you think he needs to go out there and get one more? Jerry, you can lead us off on that one.
Well, I mean, we know who's next in line for the title, and I don't know. For Brandon Royval, I really don't know what else he can do to warrant himself another title shot. We'll see what happens with Moreno and Amir Albazi. Even if Albazi wins, I still don't think he deserves a title shot. Just putting that out there. But then also we have Kai Kara France sitting in the wings, and I thought he was going to get the next title shot after his knockout win of Steve Ursig. So it's kind of a complex thing, and maybe it's something I will see Royval and Kai Kara France fight. I would be here for that. The winner gets the next title shot, or do like a 4-man tournament sort of thing where the winner of that fights the winner of Moreno and Albazi, and then that winner gets a title shot, or because there is some time to figure something out, but division moves so quickly with flyweight that I don't know where it's going to go from here.
Yeah, I think if people were going to give Taira the title fight after a win, and then Royval beats him, I saw his line of thinking of saying, I need to fight for the belt next to all that. He also just beat Moreno and now Taira. Like, who else would you really want him to fight? Those are arguably two of the best people in that division. I don't think there necessarily should be another fight. But give or take, there is that Kai Kara huge win, knockout over Steve Ursig. So maybe if you wanted to title eliminator that fight, but the winner of that one would have to get the next fight at that point, or the title fight at that point. So I have no problem with. I think Royval should be fighting for the title. I get the hesitancy if Pantoja wins though, and maybe you don't want to see that because does he just have one loss or is that 2 losses to him?
I think he's got 2 losses.
2, right?
Pantoja. He's got the one unranked loss, and then he's got the title fight loss as well.
Uh-huh.
Or I shouldn't say unranked loss. They were both ranked at the time. Non-title fight loss.
Uh-huh. And I mean, that seems to be the issue with Pantoja is he's beat a lot of the top guys like a couple times, way back before everyone, or like with Moreno, way back when, and then obviously in the title fight. So, I mean, it could go either way. If Royval didn't get it and Kai Kara got it, I wouldn't be mad. If Royval got it and Kai Kara didn't get it, I wouldn't be mad. I think it has to be one of those 2 names. And then obviously if Pantoja loses, I think that just opens the door for even more people to get the fight. So, we'll see. I guess you do kind of maybe have to wait to see how that fight, that Pantoja title fight plays out, but we'll see.
Yeah, and to spoil some of our news that we're going to talk about later, Pantoja fighting Kai Asakura, UFC 310. We'll give our thoughts on that in a little bit. But if Kai Asakura wins that fight, suddenly the division is in like the complete opposite situation. You obviously would have to decide if you want to do the Alexandre Pantoja versus Asakura rematch. I don't know if they'd be willing to do that. I could see the argument. I could see the reasoning why they wouldn't want to do that. I could see both sides of that. But you go from Pantoja, who has beat a lot of the top guys, beat some of the top guys more than once before he was even the champion. And then if Kai Asakura goes out there and wins, now suddenly he's got just the win over Pantoja, and you can book whatever fresh match you want. And he's a pretty exciting fighter from what he's shown over in Ryzen. So him getting fresh matchups against guys like Kai Kara, Royval, like that is a dream scenario for the UFC. And, even if Kai Asakura loses, you can still match him up with some of those guys. And maybe that's a route for, maybe you give one of Royval or Kai Kara France the title fight, and then the other, say, could fight Kai Asakura coming off a loss for the title. So there's some wiggle room there. But a lot of that will depend on who wins that title fight, obviously. That's, one half of the fight we're trying to book here. So it is very important. So, but yeah, I think right now the flyweight division is in a good spot because I think we listed off several different fights, several different iterations of fights. And I also think we listed off a lot of good fights, right? So I think right now for flyweight, I think it's in a pretty strong spot to where you can kind of just book whatever and you're going to get a fun fight out of it, which I think is good for that division. All right, before you go ahead.
I was gonna say, this is the best we've seen the flyweight division look in quite a while. And maybe that is part of it, is that we're having more main events and it's more exciting fighters, but there's a long list of challengers coming up the ranks as well.
And
Mhm.
I
Yep.
wanted to say, while those challengers are climbing up the ranks, I don't think, since this division's always been kind of, a little bit weaker, a little bit lighter, I don't think the UFC should necessarily get scared by people like them already having fights against each other. They're the top tier talent in that division, and that's what makes the division entertaining. So just let them keep fighting each other if that's what you have to do. Obviously, the Moreno Figgy 4 times could be a bit much,
Yeah.
but I don't think that should necessarily scare them off from rebooking or from remaking fights if they've already fought once, or even in some of these cases they've already maybe fought twice. But until those other, people, those challengers, young guys are climbing through the ranks, just enjoy that you have entertaining fights right now and just keep making them.
Yep. I agree. All right, let's hit some final thoughts on UFC Vegas 98. Probably not a ton on here for us to pick through just because this card wasn't the best card the UFC has ever put together. There are some notable fights, however. I know I've got a couple of final thoughts lined up. So I can let either of you guys lead off here. Jerry, I assume you probably don't have one because, like you said,
I'll
you were
do
at a
one.
college football game. If you have one, then we'll let you lead us off here
I'll say, after all the chaos that's happened with the Toffa brothers in the
then.
last year, it's good to see one of them come and get that knockout win. So props to Junior Toffa, because they've been having a shit show in terms of having to replace each other on short notice and then it again. And so props to him for finally getting the win.
Yeah, so I watched the first 2 fights of the card, and I saw or not the first 2 fights, I guess, but I saw the Tafa fight, and it was good. I guess they kept saying that one dude came in on short notice because he was gassed, but Tafa was also just as gassed to the point where he couldn't finish him almost. He like couldn't string together successive punches, and that's all he needed to do to get to stoppage. But he'd have to throw one or two and then take like a 10-second break. But it was a good win. And then I saw the next fight where Garimbo really just kind of muscled him on the ground. I mean, shot 7 for 9 takedowns, a lot of control time in that. And then I did see right before I tuned right back into the Royval one, the Junior Park fight. I think I I don't know how many people picked decision in that. I think a majority of us on our picks picked decision in that, and so I think that played out. And Brad Tavares is one of the tougher guys. I believe he doesn't have a lot of TKO finishes. Like he doesn't get finished too often, I want to say, in his overall record. So I think obviously he just parked it enough, strike them, landed a takedown or two, and so overall I thought that's kind of how we all expected that to play out. But nonetheless, it's still a good win for him.
Yep. So my final thoughts. I think these prelims had a couple of really good prospects on there. Cody Haddon versus Dan Argueta. Haddon was number 3 on my Dana White Contender Series prospects. Put out the rankings for the season. So for anyone who didn't watch Dana White Contender Series and wants to know some names to keep an eye on, Vendetta Sports Media, I listed them all 1 through 42, so you know which ones to keep an eye on. But point being, Haddon was number 3. He was number 3 beforehand. Um, and then I didn't move his ranking after he fought, but he still looked impressive against Dan Argueta. So credit to him. Great performance. He went out there and landed like 100 shots to the head, landed like 50 shots to the body, got a takedown, got to the back, almost landed a submission. So impressive performance for Cody Haddon in his debut against a tough guy. And then the other prospect that is noteworthy, flyweight prospect. So like we talked about, there's guys coming up. Ramazan Temirov, they signed him from, I think he had 2 fights in Ryzen and then some other fights in some other organizations. He knocks out CJ Vergara in the first round. Fun fight, aggressive striker. I don't know how good he is. I don't know if he can make a run at being a highly ranked guy, but I think he will be, a flyweight who is going to be a fun guy to watch. So I think he'll be a strong addition to the division. If he gets ranked, he's going to provide some really fun matchups for some of those guys in the rankings just based on his striking aggressiveness. So that's a guy to watch there from up here entertainment perspective in future fights from him. So those are my two final thoughts on the card. All right. And then switching over to this week's event for some previews. We'll start at the main event. We've got Anthony Hernandez versus Michel Pereira. Two guys ranked just outside the top 10, both inside the top 15. So highly ranked fighters, and they're getting 5 rounds here. And both guys have been on hot streaks. I think Pereira's ripped off like 7 or 8 consecutive wins. Anthony Hernandez has like 5. So both these guys looking very, very good in recent outings. So a win here would probably, I assume, get both of them in the top 10, a matchup in the top 10. So it's a good fight. Betting odds are close. We've got minus 135 on the Anthony Hernandez side and plus 115 on the Michel Pereira side. So that's where we sit right now, a couple days out from the fight. So, Jerry, we can swing it over to you first. What do you make of this middleweight matchup between Anthony Hernandez and Michel Pereira?
I think it's going to be a fun fight. I think it's going to be really entertaining. Obviously, as you said, 5-fight win streak for Fluffy Hernandez and a 8-fight win streak for Pereira. And it's not like they're just going to decisions the whole time either. On that 5-fight win streak for Anthony Hernandez, he has 4 finishes, 1 decision. Pereira has won his last 3 by submissions or TKOs, all in the first round. He's looking better. Looks like he's getting better and better and better, as is Fluffy Hernandez. This is going to be a very telling fight for which prospect is going to be making waves. And not saying that the loser doesn't have a good chance to still do something in this middleweight division, but it's a big boost for the winner, especially considering the kind of mess that lower part of the rankings is, with them at 12 and 13, Hamzat ahead of Hamzat at 12, Jack Hermanson 11, Paulo Costa at 9. A dominant win here could bump you up a little bit because none of those guys are really fighting that often.
Yeah, I agree too with especially, I think this is just one of those ones where it should be a great fight. It's a fun matchup. They kind of picked like the 2 most interesting guys at that part in the rankings and matched them up, which is unfortunate because you'd kind of want to see both of them maybe go on their own little paths and trying to get to the belt. Unfortunately, they have to meet up this early a little bit. But like you said, I think even the loser, this will be a fine loss, and they can still go on and do their thing. I don't know. Yeah, I'm excited too. I didn't realize Fluffy's last win was still that Kopilov. That was his last time being in the octagon. I saw he had a couple cancellations, it looked like, but I mean that was a huge win where I believe he came in a dog. If not, it was pretty close pick'em. But I thought I was super impressed by that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm excited. I'd worry about Pereira's side. I mean, he's always kind of, he's always a bigger, that real strength, sometimes strength over technique, where you could just outmuscle people a little bit. But I think, like you were listing off with their fight history, a lot of finishes, and I think this is another good spot to get another one, especially in 5 rounds.
Yeah. I think in Pereira's like 8-fight win streak, I think 5 he's gotten performance bonuses or something like that, let alone finishes. He's been like getting impressive enough finishes to where he's getting the extra 50K. And Hernandez has finished 4 of his 5 as well. So like these guys are finishing fights, and now we're giving them an extra 2 rounds. That to me makes this a really intriguing fight. And I do think that also really favors Hernandez, the fact that it's 5 rounds. Like maybe even in a 3-round fight, Pereira's win condition is an early knockout. But like in 5 rounds, especially, I think it has to become Pereira knocking Hernandez out early, because like Pereira doesn't really have great gas, and Hernandez in 3-round fights has absurd gas. And his only 5-round fight was on the regional scene, and he beat Brendan Allen. So it's his like only like 5-round fight ended up being against another UFC fighter who right now is ranked ahead of him, and he beat that person. So I think 5 rounds is like what Fluffy Hernandez will be able to do in 5 rounds. I think is crazy, because the way that he grapples is like very interesting. We talk about guys who just lay and pray when they grapple, and then we've talked about guys who go out there and strike a lot when they grapple. They're getting on top, going to land strikes. Hernandez is a lot different to where he's just constantly making people move. Like we're constantly moving, we're constantly scrambling, we're constantly fighting off a submission, constantly getting up, mat return, and it's just like so taxing on his opponents that round 2, round 3 comes and all of a sudden he's on your back choking you out, or he's got you in a front choke and he's choking you out after just insane grappling paces. So he's kind of, one of those proactive grapplers, but he does it a little bit differently. So I think that's an exciting style to see over 5 rounds. I'm interested to see how he approaches a 5-round fight.
Yeah, 5 rounds changes this whole thing because obviously we see what these guys can do in 3 rounds, and like you're saying, it's advantage to Hernandez in 3 rounds. But maybe there's something in Pereira, and now the fact that he's training and planning for a 5-round fight that makes him look better towards the end. I have a fear that if this one isn't done in the first 3-ish rounds, it could look really sloppy towards the end. But this is the fun thing about these guys who usually fight 3-round fights, finally getting their chances in the main event, finally getting their 5-round fight that they kind of deserve at this point on the 2 streaks they're on. So it's going to be a fun one. And we all know Michael Pereira always does something crazy one way or another.
That's what I was gonna say when he was saying, Pereira 5-round fight, not the best gas tank. Well, it's like we'll see how many flips and like stuff he does in the octagon that might really help or hurt him. But yeah, overall, I like we've said, I'm excited. I'm leaning. I think it'll be a great fight, but I'm leaning Hernandez. Plus, he's like a Northern California guy. Lives near Sacramento and is training out of El Dorado, I believe it is. But so I think I like his. I still can't believe that was his last fight was against Kopylov. I know he did have 2 cancellations, but that was a pretty big time off too. I thought after such a huge win, but give or take, he is fighting a ranked guy still. So I think this fight will hopefully, because we know how the middleweight rankings are right now, this will definitely be a way to push another younger guy in, because that's still kind of an old division right now with people that have just been not necessarily, some of them haven't been going up or down, just been kind of staying mid constant. So I think Fluffy Hernandez submission, especially maybe a little later rounds after Pereira's gas tank gets a little tired. So that's what I would be leaning for this one.
Yeah. I've got the same thing. I already wrote this is the only fight I have the preview written for already, and I picked Hernandez by sub, I think round 3. So I'm definitely Hernandez sub. Haven't written any of the best bets posts for this week, but I'll imagine Hernandez minus 135 will be one of the best bets. Maybe Hernandez sub, whatever that line's at. So I like Hernandez this week, and I just think from a cardio perspective, he's going to be able to work Pereira in the later rounds. But another thing I like for Hernandez that, Anthony, like you said, his last fight was Kopylov. I think that's a pretty good matchup to have before fighting Pereira. Like, they're not the same fighter, but Kopylov's a dangerous striker, great body kicks that you're going to have to go out there and proactively grapple early. And he successfully did that and got the submission in the second round. So, having that matchup under your belt before you go and fight Pereira, I think is a nice one to have because you're not deviating too far. Obviously, no fight's the same, but that's a pretty similar matchup going from that right into this Pereira fight. Probably very similar game plans going from Kopylov to Pereira, I'd assume.
I will say just the one thing on Pereira, and I know the guys who he's just beaten in Patera and Michael Olenjacek, they're not the best grapplers. They're more stand-up guys for the most part, but he's still going out and getting submission finishes, which I think it's going to be harder for Hernandez to go out and submit him than it would be for a guy like than it was when he fought Kopylov. I think that's my difference because Pereira has 9 submission victories, 11 knockouts, only been finished twice, 1 each way. So, but I don't know who I'm having yet, but I'm kind of leaning Pereira just because I think he might be able to get that early knockout if he lands something right. And I think he's going to go all in these first 2 rounds. And if it goes past those through over 2.5 mark, then we're going to see him deteriorate a little bit. And that's when the submission threat that you guys are talking about will come in.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Just from I can already tell, saying that Hernandez minus 135 is probably going to be one of my best bets. I can guarantee you, if I make that a best bet and then bet it, the second that bell rings, I'm going, all right, let's land that takedown. Let's land that takedown. You know what I mean? Saying that Pereira is live early by knockout, you're not going to hear a disagreement from me at all. I think because I 100% agree with that. He lands big shots and he can knock people out, and that's what he's been doing. And he's been finishing on the ground, but he's been getting the submission because he can hit guys really, really hard and get them to the ground.
And Kobilov landed 35 significant strikes too in that fight.
Mhm.
So Fluffy got touched up a little bit, but was able. I can't obviously remember the exact if there was any exact shots oh my god, he really ate that. But like you said, you're gonna be rooting for that takedown. Fluffy shot 14 takedowns in that last fight. So like you said, same game plan. It could be a little dangerous for Pereira, especially if he's able to weather that storm. And I don't see. I mean, he might not have to shoot that many takedowns after that gas tank's done, because I don't know if Pereira's going to be getting up that often. So
I agree. All right. Let's hit some final thoughts on this UFC Vegas 99 fight card. This one, kind of similar to the last one. We don't have a ton of sensational fights. We've even had some cancellations. But we do have some other ranked fights on the card, so it's not a terrible card to go down at the fight night. To go down at the Apex. We have certainly seen much worse. All right, Anthony, you can lead us off on this one. What are some fights that you're looking at here on this UFC Vegas 99 that stand out to you?
Let me see. I'm going down. I know one for sure that I would pick. Oh, I got two then. I know for sure the Sumadarji Charles Johnson. I'm interested in. I think Sumadarji is fun. He did just lose submission to Tim Elliott in his last one, but the one before that was against Matt Schnell. And I've said before, I always thought Matt Schnell was super entertaining, even though he didn't win a lot. But he did win that one. And Sumadarji dropped him in multiple times. Crazy. Thought Schnell was going to lose, get finished, then flips the script. So I think Sumadarji is capable of getting into entertaining fights. And then Charles Johnson just beat Joshua Van. So, I mean, that's a good win. Van's super entertaining too. Hits hard. So I think this one could be some fun. Another flyweight, kind of like the theme of the beginning of the episode we've been talking about. And then the other one I'll just pick is just, I believe it's the opener, but the Austin Lane versus Despain, Robelis Despain. And Despaine's coming off I guess I'll say hype train derailment against Waldo Cortez Acosta. I don't know how big the hype train was, but there was some momentum.
There was definitely momentum on that hype train. For
Yeah.
whatever reason, there was momentum on that.
So, I mean, he had insane knockouts, insanely quick finishes. Before that, got tripped up, which against Acosta, who I think is actually pretty good heavyweight that I fight that I like. So, it's just to see. I'm always curious to see the first fight back after a hype train. See if they can get back on track, or they kind of like Edmund Shabazi in it, and go on a losing streak. So, and then plus, I don't think Austin Lane's that good, but so this could be another first round knockout for him if we'll see how shell shocked he is, but it's on the table for him.
Best bet in my opinion on that fight is under a round or under half a round, because I don't see either of these guys lasting very long. And if they do, it'll be one of those ugly heavyweight fights of two guys who are just trying to hold each other up and just swing and land something. But the other one I'm looking forward to is one that could change the flyweight rankings again. Seems like a lot of flyweight talk today. Mateus Nicolau and Asu Alambayev. He's on a 16-fight win streak. Mateus Nicolau has lost 2 straight after he was on a 6 to 8 fight win streak. This is one that I'm very curious to see because it's the first big test for Asu. Moving up, he's now 14th, fighting the number 7 guy. If he gets the win, he's suddenly another young prospect. thrown into that kind of title picture. I know he's 30 now, so his time is limited, but that's just another new face thrown into the top of this division's rankings and makes for some very fun fights. And he's looked decent so far recently. Sure, a couple decisions, a couple submissions as well. I got to see him when he was in Nashville, and I don't know. He just seems to put on an entertaining show.
Yeah, and you know what? The more we've talked about some of these prelim fights, the more I kind of like this card. You know, there are some prelims and some main card fights here that are fun. I'll shout out the co-main event real quick. Rob Font, Kyler Phillips. Kyler Phillips was coming off a career best performance, in my opinion, against Pedro Munoz. So interested to see if he can keep that train rolling. Interested to see how much he strikes with a guy like Rob Font. We've seen Rob Font derail hype trains. Did that to Adrian Yanez. We'll see if he can do it here again against Kyler Phillips, because Phillips is mostly a striker. Obviously, we've seen strikers take Rob Font down, but you know that maybe that's not a part of Phillips's game plan, so we'll have to wait and see. But I do think that has a potential to be a really fun fight. And then also on the prospect side of things, we have Gene Matsumoto versus Brad Katona. Katona, former Ultimate Fighter guy, has come in. Had some success, had some not success. But Gene Matsumoto is the reason this one is on the radar for me. Matsumoto was number 5 in my rankings last year for Dana White Contender Series. So a couple of prospects on these cards that I've liked. So Gene Matsumoto, a guy I'll have my eye on for my own personal reasons, because I thought he was good on Contenders. But, you know, we'll see how he does against a guy like Brad Katona. I believe it'll be his second UFC fight. So Matsumoto's a prospect I'll keep an eye on in this one. So those are my two final thoughts for this card.
Yeah, the more we've talked about it, the more intriguing this actually is. And there's some good ranked fights. Like you said, some entertaining prospects. That first opening fight that you were saying, Anthony, we're going to see someone get locked the F out. Well, should be fun. Should be entertaining.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's break into some fight news. The biggest fight news that we had was the UFC 310 main event being Belal Muhammad versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. I don't think there's any shock that this fight is getting put together, but I do think there's maybe a tad bit of surprise that this was the fight that the UFC picked to close out the year. Usually they try to make the last card, you know, big and massive, and not to say they're not doing that here, but you never know with it's a Belal Muhammad main event, and you know it's kind of contradicting to like massive and big entertaining cards. But maybe they think that how they have Shavkat Rakhmonov, you know, maybe that's the route they're thinking here. So, what was your guys' reaction to seeing this be the main event for 310? Anthony, I think it's your turn to lead us off.
I thought they were looking for one of the biggest stars they have, one of the most entertaining fighters, and they picked Belal now. But I think Shavkat, I think we've all been, I mean, I know I've said this a lot. He's one of the most entertaining fighters to me. I truly like Pereira levels up there. He's just not quite a champion yet, or really hasn't had those big fights. But God, every time he fights, you know, his finish rate is insane. I don't know if it's still 100%. Yeah, it's submissions, it's finishes both ways. So I think finally he gets his, you know, can't complain about him not getting a title shot. Here it is. Big spot. Shout out to Belal too. You know, crazy. As much as, you know, people will hate on him, stuff, me being that sometimes as well, but never saying that he didn't deserve the shot, just his kind of fighting style. But what a insane, like, you know, first title fight. It's a super tough one to go against Shavkat. So I think this is a great spot for Shavkat to show, you know, he has been deserving a title shot, and he is, you know, the real deal. So he can get this win here and become champion, which is just going to set up 2025, I think, beautifully if he could get that rolling to that with that excitement. Or Belal, phenomenal performance against Leon Edwards, and then what a way just to rack off 2 names right away against I think I could say like the scariest guy in the division, maybe, or at least he's up there. One of the definitely most impressive challengers. I think you could say that. So that'd be a great two back-to-back wins right there to start off his like kind of title reign.
Talk about a guy who could derail a real big hype train.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like there's as much hype around Shavkat. It seems like he's kind of just been slowly just crawling up, finishing people left and right and center any way he wants to. Strikers, grapplers, but then there's Belal Muhammad, who I'm still annoyed he managed to beat Leon Edwards, but he did what he had to do. He found a way to win, and I could see that against Shavkat if he finds a way to stall this fight out. But I think the Shavkat era is inevitable. I think it is coming, and I'm glad that we are seeing this fight kind of wrap up the UFC pay-per-view cards, at least for 2024, because if we have Belal winning against Leon to get the belt and then beating 18-0 Shavkat, we're in for a very interesting next couple months of Belal talking. Fair to him. If he comes out and beats Shavkat, he can talk all the trash he wants about everybody and anybody, but we'll see how this fight goes.
Yeah, and I just want to give credit to Belal because, there was no, like, running from the number one contender. Like, we've seen guys become champ and then try and cherry pick easy fights. This is the complete opposite of what Belal did. Belal won the belt, and I don't know if this is necessarily the earliest he could have possibly come back. You could make an argument that, maybe they could have tried to squeeze him in on that Salt Lake City card, but that is, too early, really, even for someone that, doesn't love Belal. That would have been a crazy turnaround. I think that was either June to August or July. Yeah, June to no, it would have been July, so even later. So it would have been a real ridiculous turnaround if you would have done that. But once that was out of the cards, the following pay-per-view events, the Sphere, Abu Dhabi, Madison Square Garden were all booked up, and this was the next open date. So credit to him for taking on the number one guy on the most reasonable next open date. This isn't, a situation where he said, "Oh, I'll fight February next year," or he didn't say, "Oh, well, I want to take the holidays off and then get in a 3-month training camp and fight in March," for example. He didn't do any of those things. He said, "I'll fight Shavkat and I'll fight him, in December. The next pay per view lined up. I'll headline that." So, I give him a lot of credit for that because not every champion who wins the belt for the first time says, "Yeah, I'll fight a guy like Shavkat." So I give him credit for that, and that I think is something that he's done several times, whether it be fighting Gilbert on short notice, going to England to fight Leon. He didn't say anything about that; he just went and did it. So that's one thing I'll give Belal credit for is he fights when he gets the opportunity to, and he doesn't put up much of a complaint if he's put in a situation that is less than ideal. So I'll give him credit for that.
Yeah,
And I just wanted to say real quick, and I think he gets it as like even after he's gotten the belt. I've seen certain things on social media and stuff, and he can, like we always say, he can be a little corny sometimes with his trash talk. But I think he gets it. Like he knows what he had to go through to get this belt, so he kind of is treating some other fighters that same way and doing it like a meritocracy, almost doing it off of like what they deserve, and not necessarily going for the biggest, most hype fights to someone that doesn't necessarily deserve it as much. So at least he's kept his word about that, and he's been straight 100% with that. And he doesn't strike me as someone that's scared or is gonna like necessarily be ducking huge fights. And hopefully, like you said, he keeps that up. But it's a great first pick too. That's what I'm saying. And if he can get this dub, more credit to him.
Yeah, it'd be a sensational year, Shavkat and Leon.
Yeah, that would be one hell of a turnaround, especially after everyone was so against him. And if he goes out and gets this win, it's a massive middle finger to the UFC scheduling because for 300, they're trying to get Leon, trying to have him fight against all these other guys. Everyone said no. It was it Ramadan at that point or it
was Ramadan, so they
were
asked
all
Leon if he would fight every single Muslim fighter that you could imagine, not including Belal. And Belal was the only one willing to fight at 300 out of the guys that they were looking at. And he was the only one that didn't get asked.
exactly. And now he's the champion. If he comes out and beats Shavkat, nothing but respect to him for that. So we'll see.
Shavkat was one of the guys they asked who said no.
Yeah, exactly. It was Shavkat. Wasn't Shavkat Hamzat and Islam for 300, I believe, and all of them turned it down. So hey,
And Habib, but I don't think that really counts.
I do remember that.
We'll just throw that out there. He said no as well. I don't think it was for the same reason, but
no,
he
I
did
think,
say no.
I think they're waiting for
people's goats.
I think they're waiting for the Conor McGregor Habib rematch. That's what he's coming out of retirement for.
Yeah, that's what Conor thinks. That's what Conor thinks.
No, that's a whole. I guess I'll bring it up later. But the whole thing of Conor and Dan Hooker talking about each other.
Yeah, we can throw that at the end actually if we have time. I'll make a note of that if we've got time. We'll talk about Conor and Dan Hooker. All right, let's move on to the UFC 310 co-main event. Alexandre Pantoja, Kai Asakura. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but now we'll dive into it a little bit more in depth. We've got Kai Asakura getting the title fight in his first UFC appearance. No number one contender shot. You know, other guys we've seen come in, like a Michael Chandler, for example, had to fight Dan Hooker. Kai Asakura skipping right to the front of the line. Jerry, it's your turn to lead us off. What's your reaction to Asakura, you know, now having a fight booked and having it be the 125-pound championship fight against Pantoja?
I mean, like I said earlier, I thought Kai Kara France was going to get the next title shot after destroying Steve Ursig. And we obviously had the Royval fight coming up, and we have the Moreno and Albazi fights. So all those guys would have been busy and booked up. So I was like, kind of lines up for KKF to get a shot at the title. And now this guy comes in, very impressive resume. I haven't actually watched much of him fighting at all, but just looking from his resume, 2-time champion in Ryzen, 1-time runner-up in their Grand Prix tournament. He looks legit as they come, and this is, I mean, might as well. But I don't know if it's a good or a bad look if he comes in off no UFC fights and wins the belt. I don't know what that says about the UFC flyweight division. I don't know what it says about other promotions' flyweight divisions, but that's just in the back of my mind is, hey, this new kid off the block, never fought in the UFC, comes in and beats our champion. Good signing, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's well, first, I didn't know, has this ever happened before? When was the last time that someone's first fight was for a championship?
It has to have been so long ago. Because I can't think of any off the top of my head. And it would probably depend if you count re-entries. I know there are guys at certain points who have lost and then come back, or they've left and then come back and then get the title fight. But that was years ago. That was, you know, pre-2010 type stuff. There's other guys like Aldo who they were bringing in from, you know, WEC after they bought the promotion, but that's once again completely different scenario.
And I don't really count those. Yeah,
it's a way different scenario. I can't think of a time off the top of my head. I'm sure it's happened before, but I can't think of it.
Because my two things were going to be, one, I think they're able to get away with it because it is flyweight. I think that would be a lot tougher task to not necessarily even sell to fans, but just to happen overall if it wasn't flyweight. And the second thing is, Jerry, like you said, what would that look like? And that's funny because I think Dana and the UFC, well, I don't know, Dana specifically, might be other people, they're pretty good about, you know, making it seem like it's only the UFC and every other promotion like doesn't exist. And like to the point when people come over from other promotions, they don't even really show highlights or any fight tape from some of those other promotions during fight previews and stuff like that. So it will be an interesting look to see if he can come in and win, and how the UFC will handle that. I'm sure the UFC will then try to, you know, take over his whole history and you know, make it look like he's always been a UFC guy and stuff. But overall, yeah, we'll see. I think it's we discussed earlier, there were fights for Pantoja. We talked how it was tough, though. He has beat a lot of guys and fought a lot of guys multiple times. So I think it did, in a sense, to work out that way, that I think you could slide in his debut fight as a title fight. And I don't think anyone's going to be overtly mad might have some like hesitancy and be like, well, it should have been the Kai Kara or something else, but it won't be. It's not the end of the world to fight fans, I think.
Nah.
Yeah,
No, we just want good.
I
We just
think
want
it
good
helps.
fights.
I think it helps that when you look at this specific scenario, one, Pantoja's fought a lot of these guys, has not fought Kai Kara France, so you would think that would be a potential matchup. But this isn't a PFL fighter. The PFL is trashing the UFC every chance they get. They had their CEO today or yesterday said the card that they've got this weekend is better than any UFC card all year, including 300, including UFC Noche. They're just blatantly saying shit that is not true, hoping their investors believe them, I think. And they're just walking around trashing the UFC. And hey, some people I'm sure eat that up. I really just think it's dumb. But you've never heard Ryzen talking trash about the UFC. Ryzen's probably the most cordial organization in terms of the UFC, in terms of competition. Technically, it's competition, but when was the last time you heard Ryzen's CEO just running around talking shit about the UFC? Bellator's done it. PFL has done it. So I think the working relationship there between Ryzen and the UFC is a lot better than it is between the UFC and these other American-based promotions. And then on top of that, the UFC is clearly trying to break into the Asian market. On Dana, I wrote an article about this, but on Dana White Contender Series yesterday, Dana was talking about how they may have to make the women's bantamweight division. And part of the incentive for that would be they'd be able to sign more fighters from Asia because all the premier talent that are women's bantamweight largely is going to be from Asia, some South America as well. Obviously, there's going to be women from America that are 105. It's not just, wouldn't just be Asians in that division, but that's where it's currently the most popular right now, that weight class. So they're doing things right now to appeal to the Asian audience and trying to grow in that market, and you can't blame them. So signing a guy from the most premier organization over there, you could say one, but Kaya Sakara is probably the best guy, not in the UFC, fighting over in Asia. And he has wins over, he's gone 1-1 against Cape, beat guys like Juan Archuleta, who people thought for a long time were some of the best fighters to not fight in the UFC, beat Kiori Horiguchi as well. So he's got legitimate wins. It's not like he's out there beating up bums. He has legit wins, and he's entertaining. And Ryzen doesn't talk trash. I think it's a very unique scenario where it actually is more feasible than, if they were to sign someone from the PFL and throw him right to the title fight, you'd never hear the end of it. You don't hear the end of it with Kayla Harrison, and she's fought twice and hasn't fought for a title yet. And this is the women's bantamweight division, which, with all due respect, who really cares about that?
Yeah. But I mean, the Manel Kopp thing is fascinating because what's the betting that, say, Asakura comes out and beats Pantoja? Does he call out Kopp for the third fight?
Probably
Finish
not.
off the trilogy? I would doubt it, but we damn well know Kopp will probably be talking. We still need him and Kai Kara France to fight to settle their beef.
Unfortunately, we need Kopp to win some fights, man.
Yeah.
Talk about fun fighters, man. Every time he loses, you lose a fun fight from that guy.
We need him to make it to a fight.
Yeah, that is true. He's supposed to fight in December.
Yeah, he's supposed to fight on the Tampa card.
Cross your fingers. Maybe he'll fight. All right. Any more thoughts from either of you guys on the UFC 310 co-main before we move it along? Nothing. All right. This next one. So these next two are actually a little bit intertwined. We have Carlos Prates versus Neil Magny booked for UFC Vegas 100. The original plan was Carlos Prates to fight Randy Brown at UFC 309. So they pull Prates from 309 to headline UFC Vegas 100 instead. And now he gets to fight Magny. And then they take Randy Brown and they have him fight Bryan Battle at UFC 310. So they kind of did a little bit of switching around here. But the two fights we have are Prates versus Magny, UFC Vegas 100. And then Randy Brown versus Bryan Battle, UFC 310. So that's kind of the background of how these two fights came together. So first we'll talk about Prates and Magny. 5-round main event for Carlos Prates going up against Neil Magny. I kind of want to lead this one off because I think I said that this fight was going to get booked. I don't know if I said it on the podcast. I at least told some buddies I can just see them. The second he knocked out Li Jingliang, I was like, someone get Neil Magny on the phone. I'm pretty sure I said that while watching the fight. This is the least surprising fight booking I have ever seen in my entire life. The guy needs a ranked opponent. He's a killer. Who are we going to give him? Neil Magny. I think it's kind of hilarious, and I do think Prates was just going to go out there and knock Neil Magny out relatively early. Jerry, we can swing it over to you. What do you think of this UFC Vegas 100-minute event?
It's a named guy that's been around for a while, and Neil Magny fighting this up-and-comer that's just putting people to sleep. This is the talk of let him see how he competes, get a number by his name, get a number in his win column, and build from there, because nothing but respect to Neil Magny, but this one looks like it could be very bad because Prates looks like an absolute monster at the moment. And the way he finished Jingliang, yeah, Magny's in for a treat.
Well, you guys seem to be disrespecting the Decision King because no, I did when I was doing that Cowboy article earlier this week. I was, looking at the record book to see what finished all the records of Cowboy, put them in there, and I saw, it's got to be top guys near most of these lists, right? And then I see Neil Magny pop up, and I didn't know he holds the record for the most decisions in the UFC history with 14. So get ready. I know he's old; he's pushing 40, but it could be a grinded out decision win from him. I don't know, no, but I think. It's like you said, they found a body, they found a name that's in the rankings, that's getting up there in age, and they're definitely trying to give Prates that push. So, should be, if everything plays out, it should be another highlight finish, and Prates gets a boost against a ranked guy. So,
yeah, and Prates has looked absolutely sensational in the UFC. I have no idea if the guy can grapple, but his striking is just off the charts, like jaw-dropping stuff. It's ridiculous. I'm excited to see what that guy can do if he wins this fight. If we put him in there with like a Jeff Neal, for example, like imagine some of the fights that he can get just from that's not even a top 10 ranked guy. Some of the fights that you could have in store for a guy like Prates as he moves up the rankings. Imagine if we eventually get like a JDM versus Prates #1 contender fight. Like there can be some.
Sign me up for that today.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm hoping here for this welterweight division. We'll talk about, we got this next fight too. Guys like Bryan Battle coming up as well. We could get, a Battle versus Prates in the top 10. And there's a lot of, I think we're going to see some turnover here in this welterweight division that is fun and entertaining welterweights, knocking out old and deteriorating welterweights. So.
Yeah, my other question is, who in the UFC is strong arming Neil Magny to take this fight? That's horrible too. But I guess they're like, oh, if you want to keep your ranking, there's probably said if you want to keep your ranking, you got to fight this killer. And he's like, oh, I guess I've lost my pool. I can't do much about it.
Yeah. Dude, Neil Magny is an absolute G because his last fight's Morales. Talk about another young guy who's a killer.
Exactly.
Michael Morales. And then you've got he fought
he
fought Ian Gary too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm also just gonna throw this out there. His last 6 fights, he's won 1, lost 1. His last fight was a loss, Neil Magny. So I'm just saying, don't be surprised if the streak continues and he gets back on the win column.
It's a numbers game.
I will be surprised.
In a row of him going win, loss, win, loss. Just saying.
Let's swing it down to this Randy Brown and Bryan Battle fight. This one, I think it's another great fight. Like talking about guys up and comers, like the winner of this fight. I don't know if Randy Brown's ranked. He might be 15th. But regardless, the winner of this fight, we're putting ourselves in a great position, and it's going to be a fun fight. So, Anthony, what are your thoughts here on Brown and Battle?
I'd say he is not 15th because Neil Magny is 15th. So
fair enough.
But
New Magny
yeah, no,
lives that in that 15 spot.
exactly. He does. You actually can only go to 14th in that division. I think yeah, like you said, this is a great fight. I thought this one, this is one of the few times where I didn't really connect the dots or have this one pegged to be the next fight, but UFC drops it, and I'm like, oh my god, amazing, love that. And I also was curious the way you were breaking it down of how these fights played out. Makes me think if they're throwing Battle on 310, if they're really trying to give him a big push now after seeing what he did on that last pay-per-view in France and the way he handled everything. So I don't know, trying to get more eyes on him and stuff. Because I mean, we knew of him from Ultimate Fighter and just obviously his other fights as he looks like he's been getting better. But Battle, did everything he needed to do in that big opportunity he got in France. So I think maybe the UFC kind of showed him some love and is now trying to put him in another entertaining fight too. Not an easy fight though, but another entertaining fight on UFC 310. So I'm excited because try to see what Randy Brown's last fight was. But I think this overall should be a fun, entertaining fight, and I'm excited to see who comes out on top.
Almost definitely. This is just going to be an action-packed one. We know what Randy Brown can do. We know what Bryan Battle can do. And the way it looks at the moment, it looks like this is the featured prelim. So giving us something like this to right before a very entertaining main card, sign me up. And this whole card just looks fun. I don't know if they just announced it, but I think I just saw the Clay Guida and Chase Hooper's fighting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one as well. And who doesn't love, the way Wikipedia has it, the first fight on this card, Anthony Lionheart Smith and Dominic Reyes. Give us Anthony Smith to start this out.
Also, Vicente Luque and Nick Diaz, if that fight comes to fruition. That card's going to be a wild one. So
There's going to be a lot of questions heading into that card.
End of the year cards.
There will.
Always deliver too. That's the other fun thing. If you're not going to, I guess, if you got to obviously, lay the foundation, give us some good main, co-main, some strong, entertaining fights. And then if you want to get weird on top of that and start throwing Nick Diaz, Chase Hooper, Clay Guida, then I'm excited for that too.
So just
the main card is like, I was just gonna say real quick, the main card has like 4 legit, very, very good fights, and then after that, it's like, all right, we're gonna get crazy here. Well, watch us get wicked here and see what we can cook up. You got Reyes Smith, you got Nick Diaz, Vicente Luque, Tatiana Suarez, Verna Jandiroba. Like they were just like, let's start putting some shit together and see what happens. And you know what? It'll probably be fun as hell to watch, to be honest.
Oh, it's gonna be so entertaining. Great way to wrap up the year, but I was just thinking, so Neil Magny's at 15. If he loses to Prates, we assume Prates goes to 15. If Nick Diaz beats Vicente Luque, does that mean Nick Diaz is suddenly ranked ahead of Carlos Prates?
Yes, and they have to fight next, probably.
Oh, God.
That's what I thought your question was going to be, and I was like, no, absolutely not. They're not fighting next.
I'm thinking if he does jump, say that scenario somehow works out, I think they just do Nick and Nate versus Prates.
Yeah.
Money on Prates in this instance.
No, but you want to know something scary that they actually would do is if Vicente beats Nick and then Prates beats Magny, they will throw Prates in there with Vicente Luque after he had his whole, with all due respect to Vicente Luque, he doesn't look like he likes getting hit in the face anymore. And they will throw him in there with Prates. That is an actual scary scenario that they might just do, unfortunately. All right, let's quickly here. We can touch on this Conor McGregor and Dan Hooker news because this just caught me off guard. Conor McGregor claims February 1st, him and Dan Hooker are going to fight. I guess we don't have to break down whether we think this is going to happen. The question that I think is more interesting is hypothetically, if this were to happen, would you guys be on board with Conor McGregor versus Dan Hooker? Anthony, we can swing it over to you first.
Well, my immediate response would be yes, just because that would mean Conor's fighting again, right? I guess at this point, it's not like oh, I don't think I don't want that to see that fight because I want to see this one necessarily or like the Chandler one. I guess I would like to see him in the octagon if it's ever going to happen again. But I also knew with that whole thing of Chandler accepting a fight, Conor McGregor's going to be all in his feelings and probably not want to fight him now. So I think overall, yeah, that would be a fun one. I guess if McGregor's going to get back in there with someone like Dan Hooker, who is always down to throw down and is one of the most entertaining fighters in his own right. So if that was if that was the fight that they made happen that McGregor returned for, I'm there for it.
Yeah, from the just general fight idea of it, anytime Conor McGregor's fighting, he could be fighting a tin can and something that UFC. It'd just be worth watching and entertaining. So I'm here for it. And I think the Dan Hooker matchup is a good idea in terms of the guy who he comes back against. I don't want to see Conor come back against like Saruki and Oliveira, Gaethje, Poirier, because I think he just gets his ass handed to him. Not saying that Dan Hooker won't, but Dan Hooker's been up and down recently, and on his up at the moment. And that's my only issue with this, is I wouldn't mind seeing Dan Hooker get a bigger challenge and see him try and make a push for the belt. Not saying that if you come out and beat Conor McGregor, that won't suddenly raise your stock substantially, but Conor McGregor's not ranked. He hasn't fought in years. Whereas Michael Chandler could go out and fight a Dustin Poirier or a Justin Gaethje kind of thing and try and move his way up the rankings. That's my only issue with this fight.
Yeah, and to me, this one's interesting because this feels like one we almost got. Like, if you just think back in MMA history, like when Dan Hooker and Dustin Poirier fought to a 3-2 decision in a fight of the year, like that fight is one round, or say, there's 10 more seconds left in round 2 and Dan hurts Poirier and gets the finish. Like, or say Dan manages to win one more round. It was a very close fight. It's 3-2, and it was one of the best fights of that year. Like, then maybe he gets that fight against Conor rather than Poirier. Like, there's a real world where that happens. So I think it's really interesting to see that now come to fruition years later when it was really closer than I think a lot of people think to happening at one point. If one fight swings in Hooker's way. So I think that makes it interesting. And I also think it could be a fun buildup of trash talk where Dan Hooker is going to talk trash.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be like Conor when he was talking trash to Poirier before the third fight, like where it's like I don't want to sound like a Karen here where it's like nasty to hear, but because it doesn't really like offend me or anything, but there's more of a vile intent to it, if that makes sense. The way that Conor's talking trash, I feel like a trash talk between Hooker and McGregor would be a little bit more tongue in cheek in a way. They'd be joking around a little bit more. It's not Conor actually being like, "I want to kill you," like this is you're dead, like stuff like that. So, not that I didn't like that, but I think it would be a refreshing twist to see the more friendly kind of, but we're still trash talking. If that, I don't know if anything I just said makes sense, but I think it would be a better spin for a Conor McGregor return and some trash talk that could make it entertaining.
It'd be like the old Conor trash talk of old, where he'd actually have to think about what he says, and not just blab whatever the first thing that comes to his mind is, like he did with the two Poirier fights recently. So I do that does make sense from that aspect.
I agree too, and I think, like you said, too, Dan Hooker's pretty funny with it all the time and lighthearted. It reminds me of like Drake and Kendrick first diss track compared to what we got later, where it just kept going crazier and crazier and crazier. So I think it would just be the first one more competitive, fun, and I think we would get some good lines out of that too. I think we'd get some really good moments from that.
I agree. All right. We can call it a show there. We hit just about everything that we could think of for the week. So thank you guys for tuning in with us and listening to us talk MMA for over an hour. We always appreciate it. If you want more content for UFC Vegas 99, I mentioned this during the show a little bit, but we will have preview and predictions out tomorrow as well as best bets out tomorrow. So you can catch both of those at vendetta-sportsmedia.com. And we will be back next week. Next week, we've got pay-per-view recap, or preview, excuse me, pay-per-view preview for UFC 309 or 308? 308. 308. Max Holloway versus Ilya Topuria, and that card is stacked. Main event, in my opinion, is the best fight that you can make in MMA. Period. So that's one you don't want to miss, and that's going to be a fun one to break down. So make sure you're back next week for that.
Starts at 11 too, or a little earlier one.
Yep,
It's in the early.
Abu Dhabi obviously gets the one time slot for a pay-per-view that is not 10 p.m. Eastern time.
Who would
So
have thought that?
I never would have guessed. I would have if you gave me 100 guesses, I would have never got it.
No, not many.
All right, we will catch you guys next week. Make sure to like and subscribe. But for now, we are out.